Botanical sexism is like the Long Island iced tea of bull. It's got a little bit of everything, and it's a great way to ignore what's actually happening around you. Spring is coming. That means it's time to lock in on two of my favorite things about spring, allergies and another surge of TikToks about botanical sexism. And if you haven't heard of botanical sexism, strap in, because now you have, and we're going to talk about it. This is botanical sexism and what I think people should know about it. First off, botanical sexism is a banger of a concept. The basic idea of botanical sexism is, once upon a time, landscapers and homeowners started planting only male trees because lady trees with all their fruit are just messy and gross. So now we've got whole towns with nothing but boy trees just blowing their pollen into the wind, and that's why everybody has allergies now, just because we hate women. 2. Botanical sexism is all about trees, but most people's pollen allergies come from grass and ragweed, not trees. That's why the traditional name for pollen allergies is hay fever. Back when most people touched grass professionally, like making hay, they understood which plants were causing their allergies. It's mostly grass. So if botanical sexism were really about helping people with their allergies, it would be talking about grass and ragweed, not trees. Also, we do know that a big reason behind growth in pollen allergies is it's climate change. Because when it's warmer, trees can make more pollen and they do it for longer. So if you really cared about helping people with allergies, you'd probably focus on that. Just saying. When we really do have allergy problems from tree pollen, there's another really good way to deal with that has nothing to do with gender, and that is go for trees that are pollinated by pollinators. Plants that are pollinated by bees, other insects, birds, bats, they have heavy, sticky pollen that stays put in the flower until an animal goes and touches it. So you can have all kinds of trees of all the genders and not have a pollen allergy problem, because those plants don't blow their pollen into the wind. They hang on to it until a pollinator comes to pick it up. So to have somebody who should know a lot about plants says they're trying to help people with allergies, and the big thing they have locked onto is gender, instead of how about we plant something for the pollinators that would 100% solve this problem and do really good things for the environment. And botanical sexism has completely whiffed that idea. And that is just crazy work. 3. Botanical sexism is the brainchild of one guy with a little bit of a P.T. Barnum past. Feels like that's worth looking at. And once upon a time, he took a couple of niche situations where people said, hey, these two specific trees, we shouldn't plant females of this tree in these specific situations, which is valid because not every plant is a good fit for every situation. It's okay to not plant certain trees in certain places. So he took that and turned it into a whole pseudoscience, a worldview. He's so serious about this botanical sexism concept, he even did a study a few years ago to show how it works. The problem is, his own study wound up showing that botanical sexism is not real and doesn't work. His own studies show that ending botanical sexism and gender balancing the trees does nothing to help people with allergies. But don't worry, he was still out there telling everybody botanical sexism is real. And since there is kind of a fine line between talking about a pseudoscience promoter and actually just promoting them and their pseudoscience, we'll just call him Mr. Botanical Sexism, or Mr. BS for short. So after accidentally debunking his own pseudoscience of botanical sexism, Mr. BS is still out there promoting it. Why is that? Well, maybe because he's not actually out there trying to deliver real knowledge and information to people, he's just promoting his business. He seems to have come up with botanical sexism to promote his landscaping business, which means botanical sexism is not science, it's not feminism, it's just advertising. And not to be a total cynic, but that might be the reason why, even though we know the #1 pollen allergy is grass, he's not out there telling people to get rid of their lawns. He's a landscaper. Taking care of lawns is a big part of the job. But also, as much as I appreciate a good debunk, I can also appreciate a good tall tale. I mean, sure, botanical sexism does fall apart the second you actually look at it. But if it's so flimsy, then how come so many people believe it? I think that's really interesting. This botanical sexism scam is clearly doing something for us. So let's find out what that is. And yes, I did say scam because botanical sexism is both untrue and it's being used to promote business. That's not just a falsehood, that's a for-profit falsehood, also known as a scam. This video is going to have everything. Science, carnies, ancient giant millipedes larger than a person, and the true story of how I got fired from teaching Sunday school. Believe it or not, unrelated to the giant millipede fossils. And botanical sexism is honestly kind of a weird, cheap cartoon version of reality that honestly really undersells how freaking weird plant sex is. So of course we're going to talk about that. As a crop scientist and real-life human woman who has pollen allergies, it's so much more interesting and crazier than man trees bad. So with that introduction out of the way, there's going to be 4 big things to dig into here. Yes, this is the second list of 4 for this video, but this is the one we're using from here on. First, we have to talk about how pollen allergies actually work. Pollen allergies mostly come from grass and ragweed, not trees. So getting rid of trees of any gender is not a real answer to most people's pollen allergies, and we should say it. Botanical sexism is, at its core, a marketing gimmick. If this guy were actually trying to help people with pollen allergies, he'd be doing a lot of things different, in my opinion. Also, a small side note, this is where a lot of people really want to jump in and say, but wait, does he know that the things he's saying aren't true? Maybe he really believes it. A lot of us can get really tied up in thinking we have to figure out if someone is telling lies on purpose or if they're just kind of a fool. You know, the old, are they evil or just incompetent? To which I say they're not that different. Evil and incompetence are not opposites. They're a cycle that feeds into each other. I know that as a culture we like to believe that malice and incompetence are opposites, but in real life, it's not that clear cut at all. People who are merely incompetent do wind up taking shortcuts and telling tall tales to cover the fact that they can't actually deliver whatever they're supposed to be doing. Someone who actually cares about helping people is gonna put in the time to fact check their cool new idea. They're gonna realize pretty quickly that their botanical sexism concept doesn't actually work, and then they'll go back to the drawing board to figure out something that actually will help people. Anybody can make a mistake once, but building an entire career off a nonsense idea is not a mistake. Also, even if you're really committed to the idea that evil and incompetence are 2 totally different things, they're lying and they're stupid are both good reasons to ignore what someone has to say. You don't actually have to diagnose which one it is to figure out what you need to do about it. Ignore them. Maybe report them to somebody. Also, the guy who came up with botanical sexism has a master's degree in horticulture. We cover how pollen works in Botany 101. So in my professional opinion, he's got to know better. Of course he does. Because if he didn't, he would have failed too many tests and never gotten his degrees. Okay, here's the second thing. We have got to talk about how plant sex really works, because botanical sexism has spawned this whole extended mythology about gender and how being male is so bad that even when trees are boys, it's a threat to everybody. So in this line of thinking, the only way to make the world safe to live in is to just have less males around, and that even goes for the trees. There is a lot to unpack here. That is a crazy line of reasoning. This is baloney because gender doesn't work like that. Plant gender definitely doesn't work like that, and plant reproduction for sure doesn't work like that at all. Botanical sexism is just completely detached from reality. The best way to wrap your head around how cuckoo banana pants botanical sexism is to know how plant sex actually works. Because plant sex is crazy. Botanical sexism is really underselling how nuts it is. Plant sex is like the definition of truth is stranger than fiction, so I just want to share this with you all because it's fun. The third thing we have to talk about here is just the drama of it all. As a scientist, botanical sexism is disappointing. But as a human woman who loves mess, botanical sexism is incredible. Botanical sexism is a philosophy that is quite bitter and hateful towards men, based on 0 evidence, being dreamt up and promoted by a man. And people are lining up to buy it. I want to explore that. We're also going to talk about the anatomy of a scam. Part of that is the guy who came up with botanical sexism ran a very effective one-man PR campaign to make botanical sexism look like science. But the second you dig under the surface, it all falls apart. But it's not enough to cook up a scam. It needs an audience. And that means it has to hit a nerve for people. People have to buy into it. And that brings us to part 4. Why so many of us are so ready and willing to be scammed in this way. A good scam isn't just about the scammer, it's also about the scammees. And botanical sexism has got people lining up to buy into it. Botanical sexism as a concept does real-life human women and real-life human men dirty. But we also can't seem to get enough of it. So we need to talk about what botanical sexism is doing for us as the public, and why so many people are so willing to believe this idea and spread it, to basically do free marketing for this guy. Alright, so let's kick it off by digging into pollen allergies. Allergy symptoms do not come from the pollen growing inside you and infecting you. Pollen allergies are when your body sees a protein that's on the surface of the pollen and goes, "You're not from around here, get out." Your body goes so hard in trying to get rid of the pollen. That's what the symptoms are. That's the runny nose, itchiness, sneezing. It's kind of like how a fever is not caused by something that's infecting you. The fever is your body trying to get rid of the thing that's infecting you. Allergies are kind of similar. The itching, the sneezing, the stuffy nose, that is your body trying to get rid of the pollen. And I'm going over this because I think botanical sexism theory, it talks about how pollen is doing things to you. Allergies are your body trying to do things to the pollen to get rid of it. That's where all those symptoms are coming from. So a really important part of that is everybody's allergic to different things, right? If you're allergic to pollen, it's probably not all pollen. There's probably one or a few species that you're allergic to. And the only way to find that out is talk to a human doctor who does allergies. They do like those little pinprick tests. That's the only way to find out which pollen you're actually allergic to. A landscaper, a plant expert, we can't tell you that. We don't know. We know the plant half of things, but we don't know what your body is allergic to. It's really wild to me that there's a landscaper out here telling people, I know what's causing your allergy problems, because there's no way he possibly can. The only way to know for sure which pollen you're actually allergic to is talk to a doctor who does allergies and can test you. Find out what's going on with your body. Yes, there are some plants that are more likely to cause allergies, but you don't know for sure that that's what's going on with you. So there's no way someone who just works with plants all day and has not done testing on you can tell you this is what you're allergic to. I just know. That's crazy. And I think that's part of what's bothering me about botanical sexism. Pollen allergies are about plant biology and human biology meeting up. And so someone who knows plants like me, I can tell you a lot about what's going on the plant side of things. That's what we're going to do here. But I cannot tell you which plants you are allergic to. Some landscaper cannot just tell you, get rid of that tree and that'll fix things. You don't even know if you're allergic to that tree until you get tested. So while we're here, we should also talk credentials. I'm a farmer, so I work with plants a lot. I'm also a crop scientist with a doctorate in crop biology and keeping them healthy. As a junior scientist, I had a job at a blueberry breeding lab where we would cross blueberry varieties and try and come up with new ones. So getting plants to have sex good was my entire job. That's why I feel qualified to speak on this. But that comes with limitations. I am a veterinarian for crops. I'm not a doctor who works on humans. I can't test you and tell you what you're allergic to. You need a human doctor for that. And a lot of us can't afford to just go to a doctor to get our allergies checked out, so we have to guess. For example, my pollen allergies tend to act up in the fall, which suggests it's probably ragweed, but I don't know that for sure. That's just an educated guess. And that's why I'm making the disclaimer that a lot of people are not doing. I am not a human medicine doctor. I can't tell you how to fix your allergies. We're going to talk about how plants actually work. Because pollen allergies are really where human and plant biology butt up against each other, I think it's really important for anybody who's a scientist or medical professional or even a landscaper to be honest about what they know and what they don't know. With botanical sexism, you will see a lot of people speaking way outside their field of expertise, or having their statements quoted and misinterpreted by people who aren't in that area of expertise. That's why I'm laying out really clearly what I know and can speak to, plant stuff. And I'm also laying out really clearly what I can't speak to, which is your personal medical situation. There's no possible way for me or anybody else on the internet to know what your personal medical situation is and tell you what you need to do for your health. We're really just talking the science of how plants and allergies work in general. The most common pollen allergies are to grasses, ragweed, not trees. It's just really easy to miss that because most grasses don't make clouds of visible pollen, but trees do. There are times during pollen season here in North Carolina where there's so much tree pollen in the air that if I touch my hair, it feels dusty. It's like dry shampoo. That's how much pollen is going around. I'm not really allergic to tree pollen, but there's just so much of it in the air that I can still feel it in my throat, eyes, and nose. Now, the cool thing about working in agriculture is you get to work around a lot of dust often enough to have a frame of reference. Yay. Plain old dust makes you sneeze and makes your eyes water because it's just not good to have dust in your lungs and eyes. That's not an allergy, that's just your body trying to flush out the dust. So if you live in a place with tree pollen, it's very visible. It's enough sheer volume of dust to make your nose run, even if you're not allergic to it at all. Climate change is also making the trees drop more pollen earlier and for more days in the spring. And all of this makes tree pollen super visible. It is very easy to see it kicking around. So for anybody who's having allergies in the spring, or if you're just having your nose and eyes run because your body's trying to flush out the dust, just going off of vibes, trees are the obvious culprit. That's why they take a lot of the blame for this. Stop blaming the trees. Quick story time here. When I was a kid, we had a lot of fruit trees. One time, I saw that one of them looked kind of sick. Its leaves were turning yellow, the whole tree just looked kind of mangy, and it was crawling with insects. So of course, 6-year-old me put 2 and 2 together. I said, hey, all those bugs are killing the tree. We have to spray it. And my parents said, no, we don't. And 6-year-old me was appalled. Wasn't it obvious what the problem was? Why didn't they care? Well, the thing was, my parents were grown-ups who understood that most of those insects were harmless. Some of them were bees. And yeah, the tree looked terrible and it was turning yellow. That's because it needed more iron. It needed us to fertilize it so it could make chlorophyll. The bugs were innocent here. They just happened to be crawling around on a tree that was having other problems. Seeing a lot of bugs on a sickly tree, freaking out and wanting to spray it, is a rite of passage for most new fruit tree growers. It's totally understandable for a 6-year-old or anybody new to fruit trees to make that mistake. I saw a sick tree, I saw insects, and I jumped to a conclusion about what's causing it. Because the real cause was something I couldn't see. Like, the tree doesn't write down a sign that says, I'm iron deficient, and give it to you, right? That takes some more experience to suss out. But the insects were right there in my face, jumping and flying around. In agriculture, jumping to conclusions and spraying for the wrong thing because your real problem is invisible, it's something we have to be very careful to look out for and keep ourselves from doing. Because if we just jump to conclusions and spray, you can wind up with a lot of pesticide overuse. We don't want that. But that's also exactly what botanical sexism is doing. A lot of trees just make lots of big pollen grains that are easy to see. We can even see it blowing out of the tree sometimes. Now, grass pollen, even though it's actually causing a lot more allergies, the grass pollen's a lot smaller and it's literally underfoot, so we don't necessarily see it. So just like 6-year-old me wanted to blame harmless insects for this tree's problems, blaming the male trees for pollen allergies, it's one of those knee-jerk reactions that doesn't solve the problem at all, but it feels right. And we humans love a clear culprit that we can point to, blame, and eliminate. It gives us a feeling of a solution, a clear action that we can take, and that feels really good. But no matter how much you spray harmless insects or how much you get rid of male trees, that's not going to solve your actual problem, and it might cause new ones. So we need to be really cautious about not blaming the wrong thing for our problems. That's the biggest thing I want you to take away from botanical sexism. It's a quick little scapegoat move that feels good, but it can't actually help most people's allergies. And that means that if the guy who came up with botanical sexism was serious about helping people who are suffering from terrible pollen allergies, he wouldn't be fooling around with tree and gender at all. He might be helping people figure out alternatives to lawns. But to be fair, hey, let's have less lawns is already a thing other people are doing. That hustle slot is taken, so sometimes you just have to make up a new one to make a space for yourself. I don't know, in my opinion. Next, it's time to talk about what you all have been waiting for, Plant Sex Ed 101, and why going after male trees for pollen allergies is also very silly. By the way, if you're liking this video, if you feel like you're learning something, having a good time, go ahead and give it a like, subscribe, a comment. These things really do tell the algorithm to put it out in front of other people, and it helps get the word out. And if you're really liking it, there's a Patreon down below. The Patreon is why I'm able to do videos like this that are not sales pitches for scams. So, huge shout out and thank you to my Patreon supporters, and thanks for watching. Editing Tabor here with a quick note on that Patreon thing. We had to bleep a lot of this to make it fit for YouTube and cut some more things out. So if you want to see the whole thing, it is on the Patreon. So here's the world according to botanical sexism. In this line of thinking, once upon a time, people decided girl tree's bad because fruit is messy and it feeds people, and that's also bad. But actually, according to botanical sexism, boy tree's bad because pollen, so we should get rid of them. Look everybody, we solved sexism. I can't believe it was that easy. But sadly for botanical sexism, male and female is not what's going on with most plants sexually at all. Most people don't know how plant sex works because it doesn't really come up for us. A lot of humans are struggling to figure out human sex ed, so, not being an expert on how plants make more plants is okay, but it does mean that anybody can just come up and tell you complete nonsense about how plant sex works and pollen works, and most people will just believe it because they don't know any better. And that's exactly what happened here. So millions of people have fallen for a scam because our plant sex education has failed them, and we're going to fix that today. Most trees just don't have gender at all. Every single tree of that species makes both pollen and seeds for most trees. We call this monoecious or monoecious, by the way. It just means one house when both the seed and the pollen can be made on the same plant. And plants do this because for most plants, it just doesn't really make sense for each individual plant to have to choose between only pollen or only seeds, so most of them just do both. Humans care about gender a lot, and trees just don't, and they can't read our textbooks that say there are only two genders. They've been around for way longer than we have, and they've just made their own decisions about how they're going to do this. Now, what most plants do care about is not inbreeding. They really don't want to pollinate their own seeds. They want to pollinate someone else's. Now, one way to do that is to have each individual make only pollen or only seeds, so there's just no way to reproduce with yourself. So some plants do that, but it's not that many. For flowering plants, which is grasses, a lot of the trees, most crops that we eat, 7% of those species have genders. 93% just do both. And for gymnosperm trees like pines, almost none of them have genders. They almost all do both. As long as we're talking about the ones that are pollinated by wind, which when it comes to allergies, those are the ones we're talking about. So remember folks, you heard it here. Those of us who believe the world was made by a wise and divine creator know that they said heterosexual cis plants are weird, they're little freaks, and I don't want them. I'm going to make as few of them as meaningfully possible. Amen. As far as most plants are concerned, gender is mostly just about making sure you don't have babies with yourself. And it's not even the best way to do that. A lot of monoecious plants, where every individual makes both seeds and pollen, have a whole different way to avoid pollinating themselves, and it's called self-incompatibility genes. Your seeds and your pollen are not compatible with each other. You're not compatible with yourself. That's self-incompatibility. So what is a self-incompatibility gene? Quick science break. So imagine how for humans, let's really oversimplify it and say we have one gene for eye color. We have one version for brown and one version for blue. So that's one gene with two versions, or two alleles. So this eye color gene would have two alleles. For plants, their self-incompatibility genes can have dozens or hundreds of alleles. So if you have pollen land on your seed, but it's got the same self-incompatibility genes that you do, that means that pollen probably came from you, so you shut it down. You do not want to waste your precious energy having babies with yourself because they are going to be super inbred. For some plants, they shut it down before fertilization even happens. For others, they catch it really early in embryonic development and abort any self-pollinated seeds before they can put too much of a drain on the plant's resources. So where this gets fun is, if you define gender as which gametes does this individual use, eggs or sperm, most plants either have no gender or both genders. Their gender is not either or, it's more like yes please. But if you define gender as which other members of its species can this individual reproduce with, which might be closer to how plants and fungi actually use gender, then a lot of them have dozens, hundreds, or thousands of genders, and every single one can reproduce with all of the other ones except its own. And because each species has its own different number of self-incompatibility genes, then every species has its own unique number of genders. The world record holder, as far as we know, is a fungus with over 28,000 genders, or mating types as we call them in fungus world. Shout out to Schizophilum commune for doing the absolute most. So anyway, tangent over. This is why targeting male trees for our little pollen crusade doesn't really make a lot of sense. For most plant species, everybody makes pollen and seeds, and so yeah, they make pollen, but there's not really a male in the way humans think of it. Not to break any minds here, but trees are different from us and they don't live by our rules. But hold on, there's a gotcha. A loophole that the guy behind Botanical Sexism thinks he's got. He's latched onto this idea that monoecious trees, you know, the ones that normally make both seeds and pollen, sometimes you'll get one tree with a mutation where it can't properly make seeds or fruit. Sometimes these female sterile individuals get cloned and turned into a commercial cultivar and marketed as a male cultivar. Let me repeat, marketed as a male cultivar. And yes, these so-called male cultivars absolutely can be preferred for landscaping, sometimes in some situations for some species where the fruit or seeds can make a mess. Don't worry, we are going to talk about sloppy lady trees. We're going to get there. But there's something you need to know about this little gotcha loophole. It doesn't work. And I think that helps explain why this guy's own study found that gender balancing the trees, that ending botanical sexism, is not really going to help allergy sufferers at all. One, these male trees aren't. Male is not what they are. They're still monoecious. They still have the genes to make flowers and seeds. The feminine still dwells within them. But they just have a fertility problem where the seeds or fruit don't turn out. We all know a lady or two with fertility problems, and I hope we're not confused about the fact that she's still a lady, right? And I know, this is just semantic nitpicking, but it's nitpicking that is actually pretty important and will come up later. And since botanical sexism is supposed to be about biology, then we have to talk biology. Okay, we're back. I had to take a quick break to check on my seedlings because I made a whole little makeshift DIY greenhouse out there, and you have to go and keep adjusting the vents every hour or two so that you don't roast your seedlings. That would be really sad. Okay, back to business. Second, and here's what really matters, a male-only cultivar of a monoecious tree versus a standard individual that makes both pollen and seeds, they're going to make the same amount of pollen. Bisexual isn't the word. The sexually ambidextrous tree that makes both seeds and pollen is gonna make about the same amount of pollen as a tree that only makes pollen. And why is that? It's because pollen is cheap and easy for the plant to make. Growing seeds and fruit is a lot of work. They're big and they just take a lot of energy to grow. But pollen is just microscopic little grains. And wind pollination is just a numbers game. If you want to have any offspring that way, you've got to make clouds and clouds of pollen in the hopes that a few of them will land on a seed. And because pollen is so much easier and cheaper for a tree to make, you want to become a parent by the pollen route as much as possible instead of having to raise all the seeds yourself. So just because a tree can make seeds doesn't necessarily mean it's going to slow down on pollen production in a significant way. There's just not a real difference between how much pollen is made by so-called male-only cultivars and by monoecious cultivars of the same species. Anyway, that was a really deep dive on plant sex ed, and no, it wasn't. There's way more. When Mr. Botanical Sexism ran a whole study to find out if shifting from male-only cultivars to gender-balanced trees could cut down on pollen and allergies, the answer was no, not really. And that was using Mr. Botanical Sexism's own custom-made allergy index that may just be made up. The science of finding out how much a specific plant actually causes human allergies is still really in its infancy. This Botanical Sexism guy made up his own index. I presume that he made his study to work with that index, and he still couldn't get a real result. Even when you are using a real allergy index that works in real life, a 6% drop is not enough to be noticeable to someone who's having allergies. So, to review, this guy's own study found that going through a city and following the strongest version of his recommendations, ripping out all the male-only trees and replacing them with monoecious versions of the same tree, is probably not going to help allergy sufferers in any real way. That's kind of a big deal, and it should have spelled the beginning of the end for Botanical Sexism, but it hasn't, because Botanical Sexism is a cracking good story, and it was just too good for a lot of folks to give up. By the way, I have a funny story about this study. Once upon a time, I was one of the scientists interviewed in yet another article about Botanical Sexism because I had debunked it on Twitter a few years ago. The journalist who was interviewing me actually sent me a copy of this study, saying, "What do you mean it's fake? He did a study proving it works." So I had to break it to her that you have to read the study, and the study says it doesn't work. That's what studies do. They check whether something actually works, and often the answer is no. But there's a study means nothing. You gotta actually read that study and find out what the results were. So this is a friendly reminder to editors and people running newsrooms. When you send a journalist to do a science story, send someone who knows how to read a study and find out what it actually says. Since that is probably the single biggest part of science journalism, they should be able to do it. Do not send some poor, wide-eyed thing fresh out of J school who only knows how to tell both sides of the story, because this world is full of con artists, and they will eat these kids alive on your time, your dime, and your credibility. They're gonna make you and your outlet look like fools, and that is on you for putting an unprepared person in that situation. All you're gonna do is free marketing for scammers, helping them make a buck at the cost of your own credibility. And you know what the saddest part of it is these journalism outlets are never going to see a dime of that money you're helping these scammers make with bad journalism. So to editors and news organizations, the public's attention is precious and you have it. Love yourselves more than this. So anyway, Mr. Botanical Sexism says that he came up with it because he was trying to help people like his wife deal with their allergies. That's adorable. So does that mean that after he did the study and found out that, hey, actually Botanical Sexism, maybe it doesn't actually help people with allergies? Once he found that out, did he change his mind? Did he realize, if I want to help my wife and other people, I need to go back to the drawing board and try something else? No. Did he stop promoting Botanical Sexism and find more effective ways to meet that goal of helping people? No. He's still out there giving interviews and selling books about it and pushing consulting services years after accidentally proving that Botanical Sexism doesn't work. It's almost like it's just been a sales gimmick this whole time. Not only did Mr. Botanical Sexism not stop teaching Botanical Sexism after his landmark study, but he's actually been building on it, developing a Botanical Sexism extended universe. This greater mythology includes such hits as Allergies are when ginkgo pollen sprouts 1,000 tails and swims up your nose, and my personal favorite, breathing in pollen causes such testosterone overdoses that it's making teenage boys, quote, too horny to focus in school. Real quote. Yeah, it's pollen that's doing that. Oh, and also probably causing road rage. According to him, pollen is responsible for that. There's another strain of thought, which is cities only plant male trees because if they planted female trees, then there would be fruit and nuts, and people could get free food, and the man doesn't want that. But that one doesn't actually seem to have come from Mr. BS himself. That's like fan fiction lore that the fandom added on. I do remember seeing that one in the wild before Botanical Sexism really blew up, so we're just going to call that one an independent thread of thought that's been annexed into the greater mythopolitan area of Botanical Sexism. One of Mr. BS's favorite stories proving Botanical Sexism is the ginkgo tree. Ginkgos are one of the few trees where each tree is either male or female. It's weird for trees, but ginkgos do actually do that. And cities started planting ginkgos as shade trees, but only male ones, to avoid the messy, smelly fruit from female ginkgos, even though their seeds are totally edible. That's not true. Not only does Mr. BS pin modern allergy problems on this, but he also takes it a step further with a graphic description of how ginkgo pollen brutalizes its human victims.
Take some ginkgo pollen, add a little warm water, and check it out under a microscope. It looks just like bull semen.
No, it doesn't. What the dude?
Once the pollen gets in your nose, it will germinate and start swimming up there to get where it's going.
So the first thing to know about this dread ginkgo pollen, it is actually pretty rare for people to be allergic to ginkgo pollen at all. If you're looking for the pollens people are allergic to, it's grasses and ragweed. And then trees generally are kind of down the list. And ginkgos aren't even good at causing allergies for trees. They actually did an allergy study in Korea where close to half of all the shade trees are ginkgos. They got a bunch of Korean citizens who have pollen allergies, and then they tested those people for, are you allergic to ginkgo specifically? And then they gave them some tests. We know you're allergic to pollen, but are you allergic specifically to ginkgo pollen? And the total number of people having any reaction to ginkgo pollen at all was less than 5%. It was less than 1 out of 20 people, which is wild because this is exactly where you'd expect the worst ginkgo pollen allergies in the world. Ginkgo trees are everywhere in Korea, so everyone's getting exposed and sensitized. It's a very wealthy, urbanized country, so if being too clean and urbanized can make allergies worse, they've got that working against them. The study didn't even use a random sample of the population. They went specifically for people who know they have pollen allergies, and 95% of those people hand-selected for the most ginkgo allergies. Less than 5% of them had any ginkgo pollen allergy whatsoever. We went looking in the most target-rich environment for ginkgo pollen allergies and didn't really find much. So there doesn't seem to be any, based in reality, reason to be as freaked out about ginkgo pollen as Mr. Botanical Sexism is. That little paragraph about ginkgo pollen germinating and swimming up your nose is so insane that we have to unpack it right now. I know that if you don't know plants, it probably sounds right, but this is absolutely insane. Like, literally, it's worth taking a moment here because the sheer density of misinformation here is remarkable. He fits so much misleading bull into 3 sentences. I mean, this is actually art. The story that he tells here about how ginkgo pollen attacks you from the inside is a masterclass in how to take people's anxieties about how some humans behave, project all those anxieties onto plant cells that don't do any of that stuff, and people still eat it up because it sounds right, because it's about our problems, not about plants at all. Plants don't do any of this stuff. Most of us just don't know enough about plants to realize that this angry tree sperm swimming up your nose story is completely made up. So now that we've already done basic plant sex ed, we're also going to do a little mini deep dive on ginkgo sex specifically, which is a sentence that I have now said, because so much of this guy's grift is about making stuff up about this tree specifically, for some reason. Actually, I know the reason. We're going to get into it. And I'm equal parts, wow, I can't believe this is what my life has come to, doing ginkgo sex ed videos because scammers, but also, it's actually really cool. This is going to be fun. Ginkgo trees are so old, there's some weird stuff going on in here, and we're going to have a good time. This is a ginkgo sperm, and Mr. Botanical Sexism wants you to think that they are scary, but they are not. They are dumb little round jellyfish boys from the dawn of time. They literally can't hurt you, and I'm going to tell you why. They cannot swim up your nose. They wouldn't even want to if they could, and if plants could want things. And while these little guys may not even be able to swim up our noses, I hope that we can let them into our hearts. Let's start from the top. Mr. Botanical Sexism got really into ginkgo trees as an example of botanical sexism because it's one of the few trees where each individual tree does actually have a gender. And when we do plant ginkgo trees along a street, which is not that often in the US anymore, that's kind of a retro thing to do, we stopped doing that because the tree doesn't have a lot of wildlife value, which we're going to get into in just a second. Anyway, when we do plant ginkgo trees along a street, we do try to go for males instead of females because ginkgo tree fruit it's gross. We're going to get into it. And botanical sexism kind of grew out of this, I guess, because of the idea that, this is just like sexism against human women, because human women are also messy, smelly, and inconvenient. Well, we have nothing to unpack there. Did someone say messy, smelly, and inconvenient? Why, thank you. And then once he got really into ginkgo trees, he seems to have just kind of kept expanding the ginkgo tree lore. One thing led to another, and eventually you arrive at scary campfire stories about ginkgo sperm, which is, of course, the natural conclusion for any moral panic. So maybe it makes sense here to start with the fruit and work our way back to the pollen, to the sperm of it all. The desire to avoid ginkgo fruit is not about, ew, the fruit is messy and smelly and we don't like it. Ginkgo fruit is toxic to wildlife. Ginkgos are a living fossil. They died out from the entire planet millions of years ago, except for one little spot in China. So evolution just kept on going without them. The animals that are running around on today's Earth are not adapted to deal with ginkgo toxins at all. That's what they're called, ginkgo toxins. When they wash into rivers, they give fish seizures. And all those ginkgo toxins from fallen ginkgo fruit go straight into the river because in cities, it is usually a straight shot from the storm drain into the river. And if you're wildlife, if you're fish and insect larvae in urban rivers, you've already got enough problems. We don't need to add, oh yeah, and every year there's a couple weeks of chemical-induced seizures from ginkgo fruit on top of it. And also, the fruit gives a lot of people a rash just from touching it. So if you want to do regular cleanup crews to keep the ginkgo fruit out of the rivers, that's a whole other thing. The ginkgo seeds inside the fruit are technically edible, but they're still a little bit toxic. I think some people also have some preparations for the flesh, but you have to do it right, and it's still a little bit toxic. So even when you prepare these things right, you still have to eat only a small amount. So this whole thing about, oh, they're edible, asterisk. Big asterisk on that. I like big asterisk, and I cannot lie. Quick tangent to this tangent. Yes, ginkgo has been used in traditional medicine for a long time. Generally, that's the leaves, not the fruit. Maybe for a reason, like the fruit and seeds are kind of toxic. But also, a lot of medicinal plants can be toxic. The whole reason that they're medicinal is they have chemicals in them that can affect your body. These chemicals can help or hurt you, depending on what's going on in your body medically, how it's prepared, how much you take, how you take it, when you take it, all kinds of variables. Natural and traditional do not mean harmless. And honestly, when we assume, oh, it's natural, that must mean it's safe, that's kind of disrespectful to plants if you think about it. I mean, honestly, how do people think ginkgos outlived the dinosaurs? You think that's because they can't cut them? There's another really good environmental reason to only plant male ginkgo trees. The females make seeds, and that means they can start spreading and become invasive in an ecosystem that is completely unprepared for them because they disappeared from most of this planet for millions of years. Did you know the ginkgo trees really love to live along riverbanks? That's been their ecological niche for hundreds of millions of years. It's where a lot of cities are positioned because we like to build our cities on rivers, and right on rivers is exactly where you don't want ginkgo trees because their fruit is poisonous to fish, to aquatic insects, to the entire web of life in our modern rivers. Planting male ginkgo trees is not about hating women and the very concepts of fertility and nurturing. It's basic environmental responsibility. And I just feel like if botanical sexism were really about caring about the environment and helping people understand the ecology around us, it would probably talk about that part. And it doesn't. Ginkgo trees got popular as city trees in a time when smog, coal dust, acid rain, and other air pollution were so bad that it killed a lot of other trees. Most trees just wouldn't survive in cities at all. And these air pollution issues are still current in a lot of parts of the world. We all get to cleaner air eventually, but not everybody's there yet. Ginkgos are one of the few trees that can really thrive in that environment. And they're pretty, and they're also very low maintenance because nothing really eats them because they're a living fossil. That toughness probably explains how ginkgos made it through the meteor impact that killed the dinosaurs and the years afterward. After that asteroid hit, the Earth was covered for years in wildfires, darkness. When it rained, it was full of acid and ash, and ginkgos made it through all of that. That never say die attitude is what made ginkgos a go-to tree. As people realized, our cities are kind of an industrial hellscape. We need to get some greenery back in here and start cleaning up. The flip side of that toughness is maybe you also don't really want to just set ginkgos loose in the wild because plants that tough can be hard to contain once they get going. See kudzu. Possible bias note, I do live in the South where kudzu was brought in because it's so tough, and then now it's everywhere and we can't get rid of it. So maybe that's just where my mind goes when I think new plants now. Last but not least, in the list of reasons that you might not want to plant lady ginkgo trees, we have to talk about the aroma. Now, if you only learn about ginkgo trees from TikToks about botanical sexism, you might be led to believe that the smell is the only reason that we don't plant female ginkgo trees very often. Because there is truly nothing that social media loves more than getting hung up on aesthetics and vibes while ignoring actual ecology. But social media is where we are right now. Hello. So while we're here, yeah, let's talk aesthetics. Let's talk smell. Ginkgo fruit is kind of famous for smelling like puke or a really strong funky cheese. Now, why does the flesh around ginkgo seeds smell like that? Or for that matter, why does any fruit have any smell at all? And yes, ginkgo fruits are not technically fruits. What is fruit really is a deep dive best left for another day. Now, once upon a time, there probably were animals that loved that smell and could process ginkgo toxins just fine. But they're no longer with us. In so many ways, they are made by and for a world that no longer exists. that funky smell might not just be there for funsies. It might serve as a don't eat me safety warning to critters that can't process the toxins in the fruit. You know, kind of how a lot of toxic plants are very bitter. That's either our body saying we shouldn't be eating that, or that's the plant using a bitter compound to warn us away from eating it. And critters that should not eat ginkgo includes humans. We had to invent cooking and food processing to make ginkgo safe to eat. So any human ancestor that did not like the taste of ginkgo was going to be better at surviving than the ones who did. The fact that ginkgo fruit smells repulsive to us is not incidental. It is a sign that our senses are working to keep us from eating things that should not go in our bodies. We have disgust reactions to bad smells and flavors for a reason, and that response kind of looks and feels like spitting something out of our mouths for a reason. That disgust reaction is not 100% accurate, but it has done a pretty good job of keeping us and our ancestors from eating poisonous plants and meat that is just too far gone. Because that disgust reaction to certain tastes and smells means that on a very deep level, we just don't want to eat those things. We don't want it in our mouth. And that's good, normal, and healthy. That's a good thing. Of course, you know, fast forward to today, you're trying to run a restaurant, but your street is lined with trees that smell like puke for about a month every fall. Very reasonably, this puts people in the mood to not eat there. Yes, your business is probably going to have a hard time, and it's going to look on the surface level like this is very shallow aesthetic reasons that people don't want to eat there, and it can be very easy to write this off as, well, that's just city dwellers being silly and not understanding nature. But is it? Because it kind of looks to me like a very sensible and hardwired response to a very strong biological do not eat signal in the area. The reality is, not every plant is a good fit for every situation. That doesn't mean the plant is a bad plant, and it also doesn't mean that the people who want to avoid that plant are being silly. One of my all-time favorite top-rated plants has got to be wheat. I love bread, but I still wouldn't plant a field of it right next to a celiac clinic, you know? And the not every plant is a good fit for every situation thing holds true for ginkgos too. On a purely aesthetic level, the do not eat vomit-smelling fruit is a bad fit for very valid hardwired reasons for places where humans are gonna eat. And that's most urban environments. We do be eaten. And sure, you could argue that let's not screw over restaurant owners by making bad smells on the street is a very silly and humans-only concern. But then let's add those very real ecology considerations on top of that botanical sexism never talks about. Things like ginkgo seeds and fruit are toxic to wildlife. And that's why it makes total sense from a purely environmentalist standpoint to only plant male ginkgo trees. That's actually a very solid decision to make. It is so interesting to me how botanical sexism gives people a ready-made way to take upon themselves the mantle of, I care so much about nature and the environment, when botanical sexism only actually makes sense if you haven't taken the time to get to know nature at all. That's really interesting to me, and I think it deserves exploration. It's also really wild to me how the act of coming up with the botanical sexism concept in the first place kind of seems to come from a place of, yeah, that tree over there sure is viscerally upsetting for totally valid reasons. You know what that reminds me of? Human women. Am I right? And we're all just letting that slide like it's not an enormous red flag or anything. Anyway, I'm getting into the what's wrong with humans part of botanical sexism, which we are going to talk about, but later. Right now, I've got to stay focused. There's still so much science to get through before we can get to the people part of this. So right now, we've got to talk about the ginkgo sperm slander this man is getting up to. Look, a lot of plants have swimming sperm, okay? It happens. In fact, as a lot of you probably know, that's also how we work. If anyone has any business at all getting squeamish about swimming sperm, it's not Team Homo sapiens. Whomst among us hasn't been a sperm that swims, at least once in our life? A lot of the earliest plants to live on land, you know, the mosses, liverworts, ferns, horsetails, those all have swimming sperm too. That's why a lot of those so-called primitive plants live near water. They just can't reproduce without it. Those earliest plants are so ancient, they're kind of like the amphibians of plants. You know how animals had to do that thing where first they figured out how to walk around on land, but then they still had to figure out how to reproduce up here so they could live on land full time instead of being like stuck as amphibians, which is fine. Amphibians are valid. I'm sorry. Plants had that problem too. They also had to figure out how to get sperm to the seed when it's way over there. You're just both on land and there's land between you. There's nothing to swim on, which is a crazy ask logistically if you think about it. Do other people think about this? Anyway, plants also had some problems that they had to solve if they were going to make this whole living on land thing work. So the way these plants got around it was coming up with pollen. But pollen is not sperm. It's a whole different thing. Pollen has to be able to blow around in the wind where it's dry and not die, and sperm cannot do that. Sperm blowing around in the wind would have a bad time, mummified. Sperm are too fragile, God bless, would not make it, would immediately perish on this journey. So pollen is not sperm. Pollen is more like a spore that lands on a flower and then it sprouts a whole little microscopic plant, and then that little microscopic plant makes a sperm. It makes a couple little sperm cells and then it dies. That is plant solution to moving sperm over to that plant over there when there's no water to swim through. It's pollen. It's a tiny little delivery package, not for sperm, but for a little other plant that makes the sperm. It's a whole thing. And if you're like, what do you mean pollen isn't sperm? It's a spore for a tiny little plant that I've never heard of or seen in my life before. Yeah, it's weird. We know. The Hank Green people did a video on it a few years ago, and it's really good. Try and put a link somewhere or in the description. For now, we're not delving into the deeper botany of all this. It happens. We're just going to keep on trucking with what this means for ginkgos. All right, so ginkgos are among the first trees that figured out this whole pollen thing. When plants first started doing this, it was so long ago that the biggest thing living on land at the time was a millipede. This millipede was over 6 feet long and might have been amphibious, but it's still a huge accomplishment. That's why all the nerds are like, whoa, living fossil about this tree. They are among the first plants that figured out how to get sperm safely across dry land over 300 million years ago. And they're still here. Botanical sexism folks really like to show this side view of the ginkgo sperm because then it kind of looks like a jellyfish and it's like, ooh, scary. But that's subjective, okay? And these guys do have a much more flattering angle, which is if you look at them from the back, because those little swimming hairs are in a spiral, which is super cool. And I don't know, maybe they're like that because it helps them go in a straight line without getting lost. I don't know, it looks cool. That's actually really smart. This design is hundreds of millions of years old, and it still works. That's why ginkgos, cycads, and other ancient plants can seem so weird to us. They're so old that most of the other plants like them went extinct a long time ago. But somehow ginkgos held on and they're still here just being weird. Show some respect, honestly. And if this is what you're used to, then yeah, their sperm do look weird.
That's just like your opinion, man.
But don't body shame them. They're actually really cool. And this really kind of grinds my gears because this means the botanical sexism folks are Googling up photos of ginkgo sperm and they're picking out the creepiest looking ones and they're throwing out the ones that have the cool spiral on them. That is a choice they are making to manipulate your feelings by cherry picking information to make you feel scared of normal stuff out there in nature. This unrealistic body standard situation is out of control. We are now body shaming the sperm of 300 million year old living fossils. That is an insane sentence that is also true. That's just mean spirited. Raise your hand if you'd look good under a microscope. And it also kind of has me feeling like they don't want you to know how cool this stuff actually is, like how cool nature is, which is just super weird behavior, especially from someone who says they believe in the environment, right? Okay, we gotta wrap up this ginkgo sperm slander thing. Here's the last bit you should know here. This lurid description of ginkgo pollen. The whole put water on it. It looks like bull semen. No, it doesn't. Once it gets in your nose, it'll germinate and start swimming up there. That's not what ginkgo pollen actually does. The truth is, what ginkgo pollen actually does when it's time to fertilize another ginkgo is so much crazier than that, it can't hurt you, but it's so much crazier than that, and we have to talk about it. When ginkgo pollen lands on another ginkgo tree, it doesn't do anything. Even if it lands on exactly the right spot, like right next to where the developing seed is, it doesn't do anything. It doesn't come to life and start swimming around. It doesn't do anything for a week. It literally just sits there. So there's no way this thing is going to get in your nose, germinate, and start swimming up your nose. It doesn't do anything even if it lands exactly where it's supposed to be going. When ginkgo pollen lands on a developing ginkgo seed, eventually, after about a week, the pollen germinates and a little tiny microscopic little plant thing grows out of it. This microscopic little plant doesn't really look like a plant. It looks like a sponge because it will only go in the spaces between the cells in the seed structure. If you must have an analogy, think like Bruno living in the walls so he doesn't bother anybody. So this SpongeBob looking little microplant just hangs out in there, not making sperm, not invading anything, just fully minding its own business. for months. The pollen grain lands there in spring, so let's say about April. It sprouts out a microplant about a week later, and then the microplant finally coughs out 2 whole sperm, like 4 to 5 months later. It has taken so long that the seed and the fruit are fully developed by this point and have already fallen off the tree. And that is when the microplant that's supposed to make the sperm is finally like, oh yeah, I should do that. Not only is this pollen never going to succeed at germinating and swimming up your nose, but by the time its biological clock goes ding and it wants to try, you already blew your nose like 4 or 5 months ago. So this botanical sexism guy is giving everybody this really lurid picture of impatient, aggressive ginkgo sperm charging up your nose. That is not what they do. What Mr. Botanical Sexism is doing is drawing on a lot of, frankly, very negative stereotypes about human men. You know, aggro, always running around trying to force a sexual situation that you don't want. Haha, you know how men are. Which, yikes. There's no nice way to say this. This ginkgo sperm charging up your nose story is 100% just coming from Mr. Botanical Sexism's imagination. It has zero basis in how ginkgo pollen and sperm actually work in real life. If there's a version of human masculinity that actually lines up with what ginkgo pollen is doing, it's a lot more like, yeah, he's just sitting around in the basement playing Xbox, waiting for his MILF GF to get her big promotion. Ginkgo pollen has one job, and it is incredibly patient with how it does it, to the point of waiting until the last possible moment, and maybe don't knock the system. It has worked well for 300 million years. So maybe we should pay attention and learn from that, instead of just making up a nonsense fake story that we like better. And speaking of it has one job, we shouldn't need to say this, but pollen doesn't really want to go up our nose. You know, if plants were sentient and could want things, they wouldn't want that. I mean, think about it. For us, pollen in the nose means allergies. For the pollen, that means the end of their bloodline. Imagine having one mission in life, and now it's never going to happen because some bipedal creature that just showed up on the planet yesterday snorted you up their oxygen intake. That's upsetting. The pollen wants us even less than we do. Now look, I'm trying to make this funny because it kind of is, but this thing that Mr. BS is doing, where he tells a scary story of how the evil ginkgo pollen is trying to invade your body, is a classic case of humans projecting our bad behavior onto the natural world. The best way to prevent us making that kind of mistake is to actually meet nature on its own terms and to learn how our bodies and allergies actually work, how plants actually work. This guy is exploiting very real fears that humans have about each other to market himself. He is turning harmless parts of nature into boogeymen to sell books, consulting gigs, and speaking engagements. That's what's going on here. I did this a ludicrously deep dive on ginkgo pollen because I want you to understand that what this guy is selling has nothing to do with reality. It has nothing to do with respecting nature, and it has nothing to do with teaching you to understand the world around you. It has nothing to do with how nature or plants or our own bodies work at all. It's just scary campfire stories for personal gain, in my opinion. The natural world around us is full of wild and crazy things. Plants, animals, fungi, and other critters have come up with some really creative solutions to their problems, and they've hung in there fighting to stay alive for hundreds of millions of years. Nature deserves way more respect than just letting scam artists make up about it. Botanical sexism is not respecting nature. It's just marketing, in my opinion. And believing it means you have made a choice to let marketing, to let capitalism tell you how the world works, because it put on just enough of the trappings of activism that millions of people decided, yes, I will believe that without fact-checking how any of that works. This only works when millions of people are both ignorant about nature and when we cannot be bothered to look up things for ourselves. As a person who is kind of into plants, if you can't tell, this sucks to watch. We can't all be experts on everything. That makes sense. But plants make our world. And for a lot of people, they're just kind of a big green blur that we don't really have to know anything about. This is not what loving Mother Nature looks like. This is just taking nature totally for granted and letting some dude tell us lies about her because they make us feel good. That's messed up. Cut it out. As we're continuing our journey through the Botanical Sexism extended universe of lore, Mr. Botanical Sexism has suggested that pollen contains testosterone, and boys inhale it, and it makes them, quote, too horny to focus in school. He also credits it with probably causing road rage. Actual quotes. Now let's do some actual science on this. Most people don't know this, but testosterone was first discovered in plants, specifically pollen. But the amount of testosterone in pollen is incredibly low. We're talking like nanograms per gram, parts per billion. To put that in perspective, a real live therapeutic medical testosterone dose is about 5.5 milligrams. And you have to take that 3 times a day through like a nasal spray. So I did the math, and to get this much testosterone from pollen, you would have to snort 60 or 70 pounds per day, 30 kilograms, to get a real medically significant dose. And you'd have to do that every single day. Even during the heaviest pollen season, you're probably inhaling a few milligrams a day at most. That is nowhere near the multiple kilograms a day you need to get real results. And I shouldn't have to say this, but inhaling 60 or 70 pounds of pollen would also probably kill you, because then your lungs are full of pollen and you can't breathe. But here's an even bigger problem with this idea. The testosterone in pollen, if it affected people, would be affecting everybody no matter what their gender is. If we're really worried about medical effects here, they're going to be a lot more significant for women. So why aren't we talking about that? Because this would be really noticeable and rather damaging for women. I mean, at least if it were real, which it's not. I mean, maybe that's why this part of botanical sexism lore doesn't get into the effects that this would have on women. Because if this were real, it would not be subtle. A lot of women would be turning into East German swim team members every single spring, and we would probably notice. In a spot of good news, if this were true, trans men would not have to go to gender clinics to get testosterone. They could just wait for spring, snort pollen. That would be huge if true, but alas, not how biology works. This whole pollen makes men crazy because testosterone lobe of botanical sexism lore it's just make-believe. It's also a really good example of something called bioessentialism. Editing Tabor with a quick note once again, a lot of the following discussion is going to be about the straights, because that's who bioessentialism is about and for. So rest of y'all are off the hook, I guess. That is the belief that men and women are trapped into certain patterns of behavior by our biology. And at first it sounds nice, but this line of thinking can get really condescending towards men really quick. Well, those men, they're just animals that can't help themselves, which feels sexist to me. But this line of thinking does stay popular because it makes for a great excuse. Blame it on the pollen made me do it, that kind of thing. And we'll get more into the dangers of bioessentialism later on in this video. There's a lot to unpack here. Men, you are fully realized human beings. I mean, that's just science. If we're really worried about sexism, let's start with believing that men are, in fact, humans who are capable of rational behavior, not testosterone-crazed animals at the mercy of the trees. Although I did just make that sound really cool. I'm sorry. I mean, you've heard of the soft bigotry of low expectations? This is one of the best examples of that I have ever seen. Treating men as if they're not really in control of themselves and therefore subhuman, this is some actual bona fide sexism. Against men this time, and it's also being peddled by a dude. That's not as weird as it sounds. It happens. And again, we'll talk about this some more when we get into the why people keep buying into botanical sexism, even though it's kind of obvious BS, part later. Okay, so we've just talked a lot about science. We are now going to start transitioning into the people part of this. Why do people find botanical sexism so compelling when it doesn't hold up to scrutiny, at all? That's worth digging into. I think we should take a look. And a really great place to start is, let's talk about Mr. Botanical Sexism's background. He has a master's in horticulture, but he wasn't born that way, and he's actually got a really interesting life story before all that happened. Before he became America's foremost expert on botanical sexism, he was a Carnie, which is a real job, okay? Raise your hand if you love customer service, because that's what you're doing as a Carnie, close to 24/7. It's not like a shift retail job where you get to go home in between. You are kind of working all the time, or you're sleeping. So this is not about, don't listen to that dumb carnival worker. This is about, this guy has some additional job skills that are really important when it comes to the PR side of things, and understanding how he was able to spread this idea so well. Anyway, Mr. Botanical Sexism says that at age 15, he ran away from home and joined a traveling carnival. At that carnival, he became a boxer who works on commission. And how did boxing on commission work? Well, I'll tell you. He would challenge audience members to a boxing match, and if he made it through 3 rounds, he would get $25 to $50. So basically a pool shark, but with boxing. While he boxed, his buddies at the carnival would work the crowd for more bets. One of the things they did was have baby Mr. Botanical Sexism lose round 2 on purpose so they could get more suckers in the crowd to bet against him. And I found out about this part of his life story from this amazing article from Mel Magazine. Mr. Botanical Sexism told the journalist who was interviewing him, if a mark wasn't very tough, we'd lose the second round on purpose to get more bets down. This is how working at a carnival goes. This is literally the job. This is a job that he had when he was a kid. But if a guy I was interviewing about his flashy new idea told me, here's a strategy that I have used to hunt down marks, I might start asking myself, am I a mark? This journalist did not do that. This interview is full of some wild nonsense that we don't have time to get into right now. Just know that if you read it, take the whole thing with a big old grain of salt. Now, the cops did eventually catch up with him and put an end to all this, but perhaps not before he picked up some valuable tips about working a crowd and selling a story. The carnival background does actually go a long way towards explaining how our protagonist has sold botanical sexism so effectively. He learned really early, like before 18, how to work a crowd. He seems to understand how much people love a simple story with clear villains and heroes, especially when it confirms what they already believe about themselves and about the world around them. And boy, is he putting those skills to work. When he started promoting botanical sexism, he did something truly clever. He wrote letters to the editor to scientific journals like Scientific American. Some of those journals published his letters to the editor. And then when journalists contacted him, he would casually mention, "Oh yeah, I've been published in Scientific American," which technically wasn't a lie, but it did absolutely give the impression that he was a peer-reviewed research scientist who was doing scientific studies and had data to back up his claims, which he is not and does not have. He's collaborated with one other scientist to do a study that wound up disproving his claims. That is the amount of data he actually has going into this. But the fact that he has no data doesn't really seem to matter because he's really good at finding journalists who were too stupid to find out he's conning them. This right here is classic P.T. Barnum flimflam. It's technically true, but completely misleading. But the darn thing is, it worked. It's worked so well that he was able to create his own Ogren Plant Allergy Scale, or OPALS, which sounds very official and scientific, but once you look into, okay, what information did he use to make the scale, it looks like he completely made it up. He has not made any information available about how he came up with this rating system. It does kind of seem like he's just throwing numbers out. I think I've already said this once in this video, but the science of how we're kind of figuring out which plants cause the most allergies, to whom and how, is very much in its infancy. Real-life scientists and immunologists and people who actually do research on plants are still figuring out the basics of this. So to have a guy just randomly start chucking out ratings, scientifically, this is what we would call sus. But that has not stopped him from getting landscaping contracts by selling himself as the only person who understands this very serious problem. And remember, he is a guy with a landscaping business, selling solutions to a problem that he invented. But here's the thing, journalists love this guy. Newsrooms have been eating up botanical sexism with a spoon. And when you read the articles they're putting out about botanical sexism, it's always revolutionary theory this and groundbreaking research that. And not a single one seems to have noticed that this guy's own study showed that botanical sexism is not actually causing allergies, and that ending botanical sexism cannot help allergy sufferers in any real way. It's almost as if the story is too good to fact check, and now we're just printing stuff to have headlines. Reading news coverage about this guy, you kind of get the sense that reporters who interview Mr. Botanical Sexism just kind of fall in love with him. I'm guessing he's either incredibly charismatic in person, or the journalists are just so excited about the prospect of a science story with sexism in the headline that their fact-checking instincts fly out the window. Possibly both. Something else that's interesting, journalists writing about botanical sexism will check in with other scientists to get some quotes about their thoughts on botanical sexism. And this is how it often goes. Do you remember that absolutely bonkers quote about how ginkgo pollen is just like bull semen and it'll swim up your nose? You will be delighted to hear that this journalist did check in with another scientist to see if that was true or not. Let's see how that went. That's implausible, counters Sheila McCormick, who laughs off Ogren's intention. And just to make sure we're all following along, that would be Dr. Sheila McCormick, a real live scientist who does research on how pollen actually works, said this was implausible. But since that's a bummer and it kind of ruins the story, don't worry, the journalists did some more fact-checking. They did their own research. They found a paper that said ginkgo is the only seed plant, so like ferns and mosses, they don't count. It is the only seed plant with swimming sperm. That's not true. Cycads also have swimming sperm. The journalists cited it wrong. Cycads do that too. And pollen biologists all know this, which is why Dr. Sheila McCormick, when she said that's implausible, she probably didn't mean the swimming sperm part. We all know that's a thing. And if that all seems a little hard to follow, that's because this is ridiculous. This is a ridiculous rabbit hole. The reason it doesn't make any sense is because it's very stupid. You have a journalist who does not understand what he's dealing with. So he tried to fact check. He reached out to a lady scientist. The lady scientist was a killjoy, though. She did not agree that botanical sexism is real. When she says that's implausible, it sounds like she's talking about the entire botanical sexism thing. She could not have meant ginkgo sperm swimming is implausible, because pollen scientists already know that. They know that's true. So he's misquoting her here. So you have a journalist checking in with female scientists only to say she can't possibly know what she's talking about, but I know better than her. She was not supporting the botanical sexism idea, so she had to be proven wrong, even if the argument for why she was wrong is stupid and makes no sense. Which is just such an interesting move to pull in an article about sexism and how it's bad. This is just embarrassing for everybody involved. So there's just an interesting pattern here. Yes, Mr. Botanical Sexism is putting out a lot of flim-flam, but he's also getting a lot of help. There are a lot of people writing about this who are either doing no fact-checking and they can't tell how flimsy his argument is, or even worse, they're pretending to fact-check in a way that's actually worse than just not fact-checking at all. That's a fun dynamic. And I will say, for the record, there are a lot of people out there on social media who either know how plants work, or they're doctors who know how allergies work, who are debunking botanical sexism over and over and over again. People who actually work with plants and work with allergies and are like, this is bunk. There are a lot of people out there who actually know what's going on, trying to tell you that this is not real. Even a lot of TikTokers are trying to clamp down on this and let people know it's not real. Probably the #1 spreader of this misinformation actually is journalism. Rank and file random people out there in the world are doing a better job of fact-checking than a lot of journalists. And I can be pretty hard on folks who write the news, but that's because it's a real job that deserves to be done well. And I know a lot of folks are panicking about how the news is a dying institution. Things like this are a big part of why. It's the fact that a lot of folks writing the news can't find their own ass with a roadmap, and that makes you look bad, and it makes people not want to listen to you. Botanical sexism has now been laundered through the media ecosystem until it's become common knowledge. It's accepted scientific fact for a lot of people. And it's a total fabrication. The only way we were able to get here is because of how many journalists and newsrooms were willing to sign off on total bull and fail at fact-checking so they could be taken in by an ex-Carnie, and now they're just doing his marketing for him. We have now force-fed total bull into the information ecosystem. Good job, journalism. I can understand randos on the internet making a mistake and getting this wrong, but real-life journalists who are gullible enough to be taken in by an ex-Carnie need to find a different job. That's all. Anyway, for anybody taking notes on how to sell the next scam to the public, here's the process Mr. Botanical Sexism used. First, you gotta come up with a story that people already want to believe. And we'll talk about the art of fabricating a good story later. Second, you gotta do some technically not lying name dropping to build the appearance of credibility. Yeah, I'm published in Scientific American, that kind of thing. Third, last but not least, you've got to get some journalists to do your heavy lifting for you. If you can just sell them the story, they'll go sell it for you. And just like that, a tall tale enters pop culture as scientific fact. This is an amazing testament to the fact that being a Carnie is a real job. He's got the fine art of a convincing hustle down to a T. And just a real witness to how, if you're good at showmanship, you don't even really have to do anything else. Okay, so we just went into way too much depth on how botanical sexism is a human idea that has nothing to do with how plants actually work. And we went into that level of depth because I just really want people to fully understand how made up this botanical sexism thing is. Botanical sexism as an idea is really interesting because the lore is kind of always morphing and updating and evolving as Mr. BS and his fans keep adding their own little twists. So it's not enough to debunk each little tidbit of botanical sexism on its own, because there's just going to be a new little tidbit or twist next week, and then you have to debunk all over again. And nobody in this world who's actually doing work and not selling scams has time for that pace of content creation. So I just wanted to give you guys like a 30,000-foot view on why this whole botanical sexism concept, the whole thing, is fiction. And to get there, it takes real info on how plants actually work, and that just takes a little bit of time. So we did it. I want to give people just a resource that we can come back to when botanical sexism comes up. Like, here's how plants work and why botanical sexism just doesn't fit with that reality. That's what we did here. Botanical sexism keeps going viral, so it clearly has an eager audience. That's a really important ingredient. You don't get a healthy, long-lived scam like this without scammees. We, the people, are such an important part of this. So let's talk about it. Why are so many of us ready and willing to buy into botanical sexism? I think it's because botanical sexism has something for everybody. It's the perfect storm of feel-good pseudoscience that scratches several cultural itches at once. So a lot of people might have different reasons to buy into it. And these different fan bases all kind of blend together into something greater than the sum of its parts. So let's discuss. First, botanical sexism obviously speaks to human women who have experienced sexism, which is most of us. If you've ever felt dismissed, devalued, or pushed aside because you're a woman, the idea that even trees are getting rejected for being female can be a really powerful metaphor for your own experiences, if only it were true. Botanical sexism takes something that we experience all the time, misogyny, and attaches it to something completely unrelated but tangible that we can point to and say, see, even the trees are not safe from the patriarchy. Kind of a, yay, I'm not alone. They're such bastards that they even hate trees. Who would hate trees? Absolute whack jobs. You know, that kind of vibe. There can be kind of a grim satisfaction in that if you don't feel like you have a lot else going for you. It's basically a really clever emotional shortcut. But there's also something else going on here that I think is important. Botanical sexism is a safe way to talk about sexism, literally because it's not happening to human women, so we are not at risk from it. Dealing with human-to-human sexism, frankly, just doesn't work a lot of the time. A whole lot of misogynists and serial abusers of women and girls seem to face no consequences. And if you try to do anything about it, you become the problem, because you are being difficult. The whole reason botanical sexism feels safe as a topic is because it doesn't do anything about human-to-human sexism. You could decide botanical sexism is real, wave a magic wand and solve it tomorrow, and all the people in the Epstein files that our society has been allowing to freely abuse women and girls would still be fine. Because botanical sexism does nothing to solve that very real problem. And that's why it feels safe to talk about. Absolutely no misogynists would be affected by ending botanical sexism. It can't hurt them. So of course, people are happy to talk about it. It is a safe topic. Solving real-life sexism, so things like holding rapists and abusers accountable in a court of law, promoting people on ability instead of do they golf with the boys, women having the same autonomy that men have to manage our own health without the interference of the state, women being able to access equivalent capital and resources as men when they launch a business, a political campaign, or a nonprofit, these things would have real-world consequences. They would make it harder for criminals and mediocre performers who happen to be men to get away with their crimes and mediocrity. So just the idea that sexism could stop makes a lot of people who are benefiting from sexism feel really bad and really scared. When we take real steps to address sexism, these people feel personally targeted because we are coming after their thing. And so they lash out, they take action. A lot of women's careers have been terminated because they stood up for themselves. And one of the most dangerous things you can do in the United States is be a woman trying to leave an abusive man. It is what it is. These are the facts. Editor Tabor popping in real quick to say, leaving an abusive partner is dangerous, but people still do it every day. It's dangerous doesn't mean don't do it. It means don't wing it. Have a plan and get outside help. Getting outside help is the hardest part for a lot of folks because they can feel really embarrassed that this is happening to them. Being abused is not a judgment on you. That's about your abuser being a POS. And just for the record, one of the other most dangerous things you can do in this country is drive a car. And we're all still doing that. Taking real and meaningful action against people who abuse and exploit women and girls is scary, and it can have real, personal, negative consequences. And a lot of people don't want to do it. Botanical sexism got really big right around the time of the #MeToo movement, and also the ongoing backlash to Me Too. I don't think that's a total coincidence. Botanical sexism, in a very tumultuous time for gender relations, can give people a nice, safe way to have their feelings validated that doesn't actually scare anybody, without the risk of retribution. To boil it all down, I think a big part of why botanical sexism has caught on so well is because it feels edgy, but it's actually very safe. Actually doing something about sexism is hard and it is risky, so that can lead to a lot of people wanting a way to cope with all that difficulty and risk, or an off-ramp from having to deal with it. My personal recommendation, just my vibe would be, instead of taking an off-ramp into something safer, take breaks. Stay focused on the hard and risky things because that's what real problems are like. The whole reason fighting sexism is hard and dangerous is because it could actually change how the world works. The fact that it's hard and it sucks is actually a good sign. That's how you know you're hitting pay dirt. But struggling against a large societal problem all the time will exhaust you long before the problem is solved. So if you're feeling like you need an off-ramp, that's your sign to take breaks. So you have the wherewithal to do the meaningful work. That can look like taking care of your education and financial health and your actual personal health, even though that can mean sometimes taking years off from this thing that you care about. It is better to survive and live to fight another day. That can look like taking a break from volunteering to get your own stuff in order. We have to do that sometimes. And it can just look like taking a nap. Fixing big problems out there in the world is a relay race. It is so much better to take breaks and take care of yourself so you can do real work with focus and energy than it is to burn out and take an off-ramp into something that's kind of a total waste of time. But that's just my opinion. Okay, so we just covered the first big base of support, the first big fandom, if you will, for botanical sexism. It's just ordinary rank-and-file women that vibe with botanical sexism for personal reasons. And while we're talking about what botanical sexism might be doing for just ordinary, normal people, we gotta talk about this one. A lot of people just have a lot of stereotypes about gender. The old men are aggressive and women are nurturing, and also apparently messy and smelly. That stuff. If that's how you feel about men and women and how we just are, then botanical sexism gives you a way to say, and that's not just my personal feelings, that's nature. Which is why this video spends so much time going over how nature does not, in fact, work like that at all. So obviously, a big part of sexism is how much it screws over women. But that's not all. A lot of these stereotypes about how men and women just are, because of biology, is called bioessentialism. People can be distilled down to their biological essence that's just in charge of all our decisions. A lot of these bioessentialist beliefs are also bad for men, which we are gonna discuss. But a lot of people, including men, really like bioessentialism anyway, because bioessentialism gives a lot of people really good excuses for really bad behavior, including excuses for men who exploit and behave violently towards women because, hey, that's just in our nature. And I know that's all a little bit vague, so let me just tell you a story to show you what I mean. Editing Tabor here again with a content note, straight talk about churches, domestic abuse, and assault incoming. You can also skip to a timestamp that's going to be around here. Once upon a time, my husband and I taught Sunday school. We taught the high school aged kids because he's a teacher and I think nobody else really wanted to. One of the things that we were supposed to spend, honestly, a lot of time on was girls have to be modest. Now, why was that so important that we tell the kids this? Well, at the end of the day, to control the girls' behavior and how they looked, sure, but also to keep the boys and men under control, making sure that the boys and men didn't do anything bad. Now, why would we make it girls' job to keep grown men and boys under control? To make this make sense, you kind of have to believe that boys and men cannot control themselves, and that means everybody else has to do it. The grown men leaders at this church were openly preaching that when underage girls didn't cover their shoulders, then we were, quote, just walking pornography. I know, right? Huge red flag. But back to the point. If you made yourself walking pornography, then whatever happened as a result of that would be your fault. Because the whole idea here is that boys and grown men don't really make choices, can't really make choices. They just kind of do stuff. They're just little sock puppets, helpless before the hormones. These poor men. So yeah, lots to unpack there. And in fairness, a number of people at that church were pretty weirded out by that when they started teaching all of this stuff. And they were like, well, okay, somebody normal has to stay at this church, so that is not the only thing the kids growing up here hear about themselves. So anyway, that's all to just set the scene for you. This is what was in the air when all of this was going on, when we were teaching Sunday school. So as Sunday school teachers, we were being asked by the other adults at church to teach these high school boys, who, by the way, were actually pretty normal people. They were like fine and normal and thoughtful and everything. We were being asked by the other adults in their life to teach them that actually they're not okay, that they were actually secretly violent, hopeless, and out of control, that them existing was a risk to everybody else, that that's who they were and it couldn't be helped. I mean, that is kind of baked into the whole girls must be modest so boys and men aren't tempted business model, isn't it? The only way any of that really makes sense is if you truly believe on some level that men are not fully human. You just do not believe in men if you believe this. Otherwise, you just talk to the guys about acting right. It's not that hard. My husband and I weren't really feeling all of that, so instead of doing all of that, we just had some straight talk with the class about how we shouldn't sexually assault people. Now, I know people think it's hard to talk about consent in a setting where the expectation is sex okay after marriage, end of list. Why would you even need to talk about consent in that situation? Well, if you're married and your spouse doesn't want to, then don't do it, because that's sexual assault. And if it's wrong to do that to a stranger, then it's wrong to do it to your spouse too, isn't it? We just talked about that. And yes, that is spouse, not wife, because ladies, we can be creepy too. The rule here is respect for everybody. It's not complicated. Editing Tabor here with a quick note. We weren't even doing the, ooh, we're edgy youth pastors thing. This is literally what this church had been teaching back in the 1950s. And yes, it's very cringe old guy at church language, but it is talking to men about acting right. If conservatives actually wanted to be conservative, they'd be doing this. They would be teaching this, which is a really far cry from this like, boo-hoo, men just can't help themselves nonsense that a lot of conservatives right now are actually doing. And people can get really freaked out about these conversations, but they don't have to be awful. You can keep it fun. We will go, okay guys, here's the scenario. You're in an elevator together and you're alone. What do you do? And you would say, yes, you. And the student would go, don't sexually assault them. And we're like, that's right, 5 points for you. And then we go, okay, class, now let's say you're with somebody who's wearing one of them walking pornography outfits that they keep telling us about. Then what do you do? Then is it cool to sexually assault them? And the class is like, no. And we would go, that's correct. And of course, you really have to talk about how most sexual assault in this world is not some stranger jumping out at you out of the bushes. It's people who know each other, ignoring boundaries and just doing what they want to do. So a lot of this discussion was just be good to your friends, be good to your loved ones. Don't be that scumbag. It's not that complicated. So in spite of everything, we were still able to have some good talks with the students about healthy relationships and consent that still works in the whole sex okay after marriage end of list lifestyle. Because even if you believe that all of these kids are only ever going to have sex after marriage, consent still matters then. It is the key for a healthy and loving family relationship. So if you believe that you want families to be strong, you should be teaching your kids this. Absolutely. If your main priority in life is making sure that your kids have healthy, fulfilling, wholesome family lives, this is the foundation of that. I hope it gave these students some real tools to navigate their lives, and most of the parents appreciated it. Most of the parents. Because teaching that lesson on consent that was very church-friendly is how my husband and I got fired from teaching Sunday school. Because one set of parents didn't like it, and they complained to the pastor a lot. Yes, there was a set of parents who wanted people telling their sons, you're a creep who can't help himself. So bad that if you didn't do that, they would campaign to get you fired from teaching Sunday school, unless you agreed to teach their sons that they were fundamentally flawed and broken people because they were boys. And here's the thing, none of these kids were horrible juvenile delinquents who needed accountability. Our students were thoughtful. They were already thinking about other people. They were funny, and they were a pain in the butt sometimes, but that just comes with the territory of being in high school. You can't take that personally. And not for nothing, but this couple had a lot of kids, and it was pretty clear from the wife that she did not want to keep having more, but they did. Now this church did officially believe that birth control, like sex, is okay if you're married. So the ladies, we're talking birth control one day, like you do, and she's saying that the pill didn't work for me. This IUD didn't work. That IUD didn't work. She's already done the work and run through all of her options, and her husband refused to get a vasectomy. He just didn't want to. And then she said, and I'll never forget this, in kind of a hopeless wail, what am I supposed to do? Say no to my husband? Yes, girl, that's exactly what you do. When he's behaving like this, saying no to your husband is exactly what happens. And when saying no doesn't work, which it sounds like was the case here, that's called sexual assault. It still counts when you're married. So you can maybe imagine why this couple, or at least one of the people in it, took it real personal when we introduced the concept of consent and that it still counts when you're married. This guy wanted his own sons and daughters, and everyone else's sons and daughters, to be taught that men cannot control themselves because that was his excuse. Now, why did he care so much about what other people thought about this? That's because it's one thing to be a terrible person and make your own excuses. But for a lot of people, that's not enough. Because what if you make your little excuses, but then people don't believe them? Then what? That would be the worst thing ever. So folks like this, who behave badly and want to make a lot of excuses for themselves, also want to make sure that everybody in the world already kind of has those excuses preloaded in their minds. Because then it's less work to make excuses, you don't have to start from scratch. And they want those excuses, like bioessentialism, the old, well, I just can't help it because this is how men are. They want those excuses to already be everywhere so that they feel like the truth. Because if everybody just believes that men can't control themselves by nature, then what he was doing wasn't wrong. He was just doing what was natural. But if men can control themselves, then that might mean he's just a So a lot of people can be really motivated to spread around bioessentialism and other ideas about how, men just behave this way and it's just natural and they can't help themselves. So don't ask them to or else. And botanical sexism is a perfect fit for this mindset. It lets people point to the trees and say, no, it's not just me, it's not just us. All the males in nature are like this. It's just how we are, and there's nothing that can be done about it. So don't even try to think that it could ever be different. And something really interesting about folks like this who really buy into these ideas about how men cannot be expected to act right. Yeah, they're motivated to spread that idea, but it goes further. They're also really motivated to stamp out any other ideas about how men are, how men can behave, how they can make choices. Any ideas about how men are rational human beings. They don't want that anywhere. If you've ever heard the phrase culture, this is how it works. Some people are into sexually assaulting other people, but to get away with it, they need everyone around them to be on their team, to be their enablers. It is kind of a team sport. So folks who are into this put in actual work to make preying on women and girls seem normal, natural. They are literally putting in the time to keep the next generation from even learning about consent, working to make sure the kids do not learn how to build healthy relationships where you can actually be open with each other. So there's so many people who are really worried about male loneliness or a crisis of masculinity, and they're always blaming feminists and women for this. But the thing is, a lot of traditional beliefs are quite hateful and insulting towards men, because as long as we believe that men are fundamentally broken, irrational, and unable to control themselves, then there's no point in even trying with them, is there? It is a philosophy of giving up on half the human race. That's really sad. Imagine growing up with your own parents believing that you're kind of an animal who only wants one thing and can't really be trusted. And not just that, but they'll only let you be around other people who also believe that about you. That can be your whole world. And that is a horrible thing to be made to believe about yourself. And then, if their sons struggle to believe in themselves, to build their own lives, to choose a direction in their life, and to have successful relationships, you know who they're gonna blame? Feminists, women. This way of raising men and boys is just an exercise in passing the buck. The cool thing, is if you can just get everybody on board with this idea, with believing that men are hopeless, then you, as a parent of boys, don't have to take responsibility. If your sons kind of turn out to be a mess, you need to be able to have some patience, integrity, delayed gratification. You have to know how to make friends. These are the things that make life worth living. And a lot of people are not teaching their sons any of that because they don't think their sons are capable of it. The belief that men are just bad at these things is so common, and it is so insulting to men. You could even say it's sexist. And I know we've dwelt a lot on how sexism is bad for men here. I hope we don't really need to explain why passing on good old-fashioned traditional culture is bad for women and girls. Okay, so we just talked about botanical sexism and how it can appeal to people just for strictly personal reasons in their own life. For a lot of women, it can validate their experiences of being misogynied against, and it can be a safe way to talk about it. And for some men, it actually helps them get away with exploiting women. So, personal reasons. Now, let's talk about a second element to the botanical sexism fandom. Botanical sexism is such a gift to people who want to look like they care about women, but don't actually want to do anything. Also, there can be a lot of overlap between this and the last group. If you are a person, perhaps a man, but not necessarily, who wants to show everyone how much you care about women without actually having to act right, just post an article or a TikTok about botanical sexism. Boom, instant points. You are now in the fight for women's rights because you complained about trees. This is where the fact that railing against botanical sexism requires very little real effort and basically zero risk really comes in clutch. You get to position yourself as one of the good ones without ever having to actually do anything. I know the phrase virtue signaling gets used in crazy ways, but this is virtue signaling in its purest form. All signal, no virtue. And now, let's talk about a third kind of person that botanical sexism is really useful for. That would be people in the media and the news. And hashtag not all news and media here, but for folks in these jobs, botanical sexism can be pure gold. It lets them publish something that sounds like their outlet really cares about women, and it'll get clicks from people who care about women. But it will not offend your readers who happen to be men who abuse and exploit women. They won't bother you with angry phone calls, drop their subscriptions, and most importantly, men who abuse and exploit women and also run important businesses or hold political office will still take your phone calls. If you run articles about what these human men are actually doing to human women, then they will not work with you anymore on your journalism, and that would be so sad. At first, I was really confused and kind of upset with how many journalists just seem to really love botanical sexism and completely failed to fact check it in a meaningful way. With how newsrooms only seem to send journalists who straight up don't know enough about the world to even know how to fact check this guy. Because if you think of journalism as a thing where the end goal is getting to the truth, which some journalism is like that, but not all of it. If that's how you think all journalism works, then how journalism was treating botanical sexism can be very confusing. But if you look at journalism as a business, where certainly not all, but a lot of the people running news organizations are men who do enjoy taking advantage of a woman every once in a while, who want to be friends with other men in powerful positions who also enjoy taking advantage of women from time to time. And they see each other as buds, as allies who can help each other out with achieving their goals of gaining power and influence and using it to abuse women and girls. If you see business and political power and the industry of selling stories to the public in that way, then it makes a lot more sense. And that is, I'm going to tell you right now, a way more paranoid framing of the issue that I'm honestly really comfortable with. I really don't think all or even most men are into this kind of thing, but boy, just enough of them are. And there are news outlets out there that are actually trying to get real information to people that'll help them out. And those organizations have had a lot of work over the last several years. Maybe some more important things to do than debunking one guy's botanical sexism thing. So they just don't get around to it, which is totally valid. There's a lot going on right now. But that does mean that the news outlets that are willing to dedicate time and staff resources to botanical sexism might lean a little more towards less rigorous about the facts and more on the good storytelling. I will also say that botanical sexism coverage can be really good for getting clicks from both sides of the political aisle. You can sell the story to progressives who are outraged at yet another example of sexism, and you can sell it to conservatives who are outraged at woke culture gone too far. So from a business perspective, bull coverage on botanical sexism is a win-win. So when serious journalists are busy doing other things, that means the less serious journalists who aren't as worried about fact-checking are the only people covering it. So between that and the clickbait cash cow potential of botanical sexism headlines, that really does help explain why the news coverage about botanical sexism can be so gullible, really is the word. Credulous? I don't know. And now that social media is a proper business too, not just the news, botanical sexism remains a great way to get clicks for creators in general. I've done some playing around with titles and thumbnails, and I'm not a wizard with it by any means, but I have gotten some sense of what gets people excited to click on things. First of all, the people love their gossip. People also love headlines that tell you, we're letting you in on a little secret. Also headlines where it's very obviously about how X group of people is getting screwed. People love to click on that. Also, if you repost it on social media, then you get to feel like you're taking a stand, and people love that one too. So for social media creators, botanical sexism is kind of a perfect storm for getting clicks. It checks a lot of the boxes that up your chances of going viral. It's sensational, it's a little conspiracy flavored, but not too much that it'll drive people away, and it's got the word sex in it. Win-win-win. So creators are just gonna make stuff about it. And then of course, if you're scrolling through social media and all these creators are talking about it, you're just gonna see it so often that of course it's real. Obviously, everybody knows about it. It just kind of becomes part of the background noise of life. Everyone knows it's a thing, it's a thing. And for the public at large, botanical sexism really just has this appeal of feeling like you're in on a secret that other people don't know about. We already talked about this some with the social media of it all, but botanical sexism just really gives people a great chance to say, hey, did you know that this thing that sounds totally crazy is actually true? It makes the sharer feel smart and informed and like they're illuminating their audience with superior knowledge. Who doesn't love that? And now you, the audience, the person who has just received this knowledge, well, you can feel enlightened. You're in the know now. And this is why so many people love sharing conspiracy theories and mind-blowing facts, even the ones that don't really stand up to scrutiny. Humans just love gossip, and I suspect we kind of get a dopamine hit out of spilling secrets, even if they're not real. That's not really the point. I think humans just love spilling secrets for love of the game. Last but not least, we gotta talk lawmakers. I don't think there are a lot of lawmakers that are really on botanical sexism, at least not yet, but it is starting to happen. As someone who's run for office, there are people out there in public service who are there because they actually want to serve the public. They want to solve the public's problems. And massive respect to them, because staying focused on ordinary people's problems when you have to spend most of your time courting donors is tough. However, there are of course a lot of people who found that being a loudmouth is a great way to build a career in politics. I like to think of these folks as remoras on the shark of public anger. I'm not sure how much of this is actually being driven by lawmakers versus, how do we say this? So there is a certain kind of useless loudmouth in politics. Botanical sexism is perfect for this kind of person. Botanical sexism is in a sweet spot for a useless loudmouth's favorite kind of problem to solve. They want to make a lot of noise in public life, they want to be seen as a champion, and they don't want to actually do anything. Passing laws against botanical sexism costs basically nothing. It takes no political courage, and it's a great way to look like you're fighting for people without having to make any difficult decisions about, say, actually funding domestic violence shelters or enforcing equal pay. It's a great way to put yourself out there as a champion of the people, someone who really defends women and mothers, and you don't have to actually do anything for women and mothers. It's a win-win. So of course, we're already seeing municipalities pass botanical sexism ordinances that ban discrimination against female trees. How are the human women doing in these districts? Who cares? Botanical sexism's impact in politics still looks to be at kind of the local level. People are pushing for local ordinances against botanical sexism. That seems to be where it's at right now. There is a change.org petition to end botanical sexism from 2 years ago that has 16 signatures, and local Senate candidate Roy Cooper also posted about it as an April Fool's Day joke. There doesn't really seem to be a mass movement about it yet, which is good because that is a terrible waste of a mass movement's energy. We have some extremely real problems out there, and I personally want our leadership to be focused on that, not scoring points by going all in on a fake problem. Rare W for mainstream politics, actually. There doesn't seem to be anyone trying to champion this issue at a state or national level, which is appropriate. All right, we gotta land this plane. All of these things together, all of these factors help explain why botanical sexism has such staying power as an idea. It's got something for everybody. For mediocre news outlets, it's a dependable payday. For a certain kind of lawmaker and political busybody, it's a nice loud soapbox with no downside. If you promise to end botanical sexism, there is no real industry or powerful interest group who is gonna feel threatened by that. It is a 100% risk-free crusade, and it's a great way to brand yourself as cares about women without actually having to do anything for us. Botanical sexism is also a set of beliefs that really feed into the idea that men just are a certain way, violent and exploitative, and abusers love that because if everybody believes it, it's easier to get away with what they do. And last but not least, botanical sexism is a story that gives people who feel overwhelmed by misogyny a tangible and physical villain that they can go and target with zero risk to themselves. And that safe target is male trees, which for the most part don't even exist. So remember that story about 6-year-old me who really wanted to spray a tree to kill some insects that were actually harmless? Because those insects sure looked like the problem. That kind of mistake is totally understandable for a child, with a child's understanding of how the world works. It is natural for children to not understand how things work. They're new here. They don't know what's going on. The whole job and mission, and honestly the joy of adulthood, is growing up, to actually use our time on Earth to our advantage, to understand how the world works, to learn things so we don't keep falling for cheap tricks. It's something you really have to understand about capitalism, power, whatever you want to call it. All of that is people in power love it when we're stupid. People in power love it when we're gullible. Because that means we're going to fall for whatever scam, whatever political movement, or whatever cheap garbage product they're trying to sell us. Being gullible and stupid means we can spend our entire lives running around in circles, chasing fake problems, instead of getting to the root of the problem and solving that. Our problems are mostly caused by powerful people having their way with us. When we are stupid and gullible, we keep falling for whatever distractions, shiny objects, and excuses they keep throwing our way. And believe me, they throw a lot of that stuff our way. Like botanical sexism. Botanical sexism started out decades ago as one guy's sales pitch for landscaping services. And since then, it has metastasized into something much, much bigger. Because that one guy did a great job crafting that sales pitch. It's got just enough truth to sound convincing. Sexism is real, after all. Then he added some made-up pseudoscience that most people didn't notice, because who cares about how plants work, you know? And then he told a story that sounds like it's about caring about women, but it's actually built on some very sexist beliefs about how men are dangerous and out of control. These are ideas that a lot of people already want us to believe because they are such good excuses for men who behave like creeps. Put it all together, and botanical sexism is like the Long Island iced tea of bull. It's got a little bit of everything, and it's a great way to ignore what's actually happening around you. Like the fact that pollen allergies are getting worse, and we know for a fact that that is because of climate change. If we really want to fix allergies, let's work on that. Things like the human-on-human sexism that is costing human women our livelihoods and too many of our lives. Problems like a lot of us are really ignorant about how the world around us works, the natural world, and we're just okay with living like that. And we can't all be experts on everything. But when so many of us are this ignorant about something this important, how plants work, that means anybody can just start coming up to us as an entire public, start telling us lies, and we'll believe it. That's not good. Or problems like we're so insecure and eager to prove how much we care that we'll sign on to anything if it kind of sounds right. Not falling for this stuff is the work of adulthood. This is what coming of age is for. Stepping out of the quick and easy explanations that make sense to children and learning to make sense of our world, which is a big, bizarre, and complex place that takes real effort and time to understand. And that's okay. That's just what adulthood is. It's also just our job as adults to build something better for the people who are gonna come next. Nobody is gonna come and rescue us or them but ourselves. We're it. It is on us to figure this stuff out and make this world better. And we can't do that alone, and we definitely can't do it if we are running ourselves ragged, chasing after phantoms like botanical sexism. So if you're still watching, congrats on making it to the end. Stay hydrated, try and take breaks from things before you fall apart, and stay curious. There is a lot going on in this world of ours. Y'all do good out there.